Welcome, everyone. I'm Ella Fernandez, the head of connections at BTechly. It is my honor and pleasure to kick off our first Power Platform Community Conference webinar series with our sponsor, TRN Digital. Today, they're going to talk to you about Beyond Chatbots. Well, I just have a few housekeeping notes before we dive right in. If you want to ask questions and get answers in the live Q&A, you must register for the webinar. If you have not yet registered because you're watching this live across our channels, then please go to btechly.com to register. Select today's webinar date and enter your email address to complete your registration. Somebody will process your registration and get you into the Q&A chat because it will not be live streamed. If you don't have a conference pass yet for the Power Platform Community Conference this October 27th to 29th at Las Vegas, please register now by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to powerplatformconf, that is CONF.com, and be sure to use the discount code BOGO, BOGO, to get a buy one, get one free when you register for the conference. And more importantly, please like, subscribe, and follow both BTechly and the Power Platform Community Conference. Now, without further ado, please sit back and relax while you enjoy today's learning experience.
All right. Thank you, Ella, for that introduction. Thank you to everyone that has joined this webinar today. We're going to be spending the next 45 minutes or so really talking about what we're seeing in the landscape of AI as much as it relates to doing a lot more than just chatbots. So that being said, a little bit about me. My name is Dmitry Aropetov. I am a partner at Turn Digital. Been working in this space for a little over 20 years, back when AI was defined by machine learning and other pre-built model processing. My core background is with Microsoft 365 and Azure. I've started my career as a SharePoint developer a little over 20 years ago and really grew with the Microsoft Cloud wave, embracing the latest and greatest as Microsoft has been developing and pushing the edge forward. I also was very fortunate to be one of the co-founders and still current organizer of the Boston Office 365 user group that we started about 11 years ago, back when Office 365 was still a big question mark in many people's minds. And we're glad to see how much it's grown and really expanded since that time. So that being said, let's look at the agenda for today. We're going to cover three main points. So one, we want to talk about some of the AI challenges that we're all facing within our organizations. The second, we want to take a little bit of a walkthrough in terms of Microsoft's AI ecosystem. And then we'll finish this off with practical strategies and use cases for how you can start to take your organization forward to embrace more of the agentic future. To Ella's point, for those that have registered, you are able to send questions into the Q&A. I will try to pick some of those off as we go along, but we'll also have some time carved out towards the end of today's session to make sure that we're able to get to most of them. So when we look at AI challenges in general, we really see that there's a lot of different pressure points that are coming in from different parts of the organization. For one set of users, organizations are really feeling that they need to accelerate their innovation. They believe that their competitors are doing a lot more in the AI space than what they are. They feel that if they're not fully embracing and fully adapting this technology and really using that throughout every aspect of their business, they're starting to fall behind. And this is a very real pressure because with many organizations facing the same type of landscape and same type of vision, there's really a lot of edge in terms of what are we doing, what could we be doing, what should we be doing, and how do we get there in a way that makes sense for our organization. There's also the ongoing challenges of the need to work smarter, right? How do we take some of these basic decisions that are made on a day-to-day basis? How do we take some of these tasks that people are doing over and over again that could simply be simplified? And how do we really empower our workforce to focus on the high value work rather than just the operational overhead of the day-to-day tasks that keep us operating as a business? And the last one is really around delivering more value, right? How do we do more with less? How do we take the same workforce that we have and exponentially increase how much value that we can develop and bring forward using the same set of constraints, just doing things more efficiently, more better, and thinking about problems in a slightly different way. If any of these challenges resonate with where you are within your organization, I'm here to tell you that you're not alone. This is a very common set of pressure points that we're seeing across every industry, especially industries where AI could really play a larger focus in. So the first thing we want to talk about is where we are in the hype cycle for generative AI as of the end of 2025. For those that are familiar with Gartner's hype cycle, this really gives us a roadmap of the different technologies over the course of these five different sections. One is the innovation trigger, then the peak of inflated expectations, followed through the trough of disillusion, the slope of entitlement, and the plateau of productivity. Now, what's interesting with all of these technologies is not the fact that they're going through this wave, and this type of wave and cycle continues for just about every kind of latest and greatest hot technology that's been on the market. But the biggest question is how fast a given technology progresses through this hype cycle. And one of the key things that we wanted to point out here is that today, agentic AI is really at the very peak of inflated expectations. But what's most interesting here is that according to Gartner, the plateau will be reached within under 2 years, right? Which is the white circle that you see within this chart. Now, for most other technologies that we've seen come through the hype cycle, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or even over 10 years has been a pretty common expectation that once we get something where everyone wants a piece of it, all the way to the point where we realize what it's actually going to be well purposed for and well used for takes time. With agentic AI, we're looking at under 2 years, which means that Gartner sees the industry moving faster than ever before as it relates to agentic AI, which means that we're getting to the point now where we're not just talking about what this could do, we're actually seeing it being adopted pretty broadly, with those key use cases being pretty well defined and iterated upon, so that we know where we get the true value of this in the very near future. So if we look at the AI chasm, and for the MBAs that we have on the call, crossing the chasm is a pretty common methodology and discussion around how do we get something from being the very early adopters all the way into the majority. And based on what we're seeing with agentic AI at Turn Digital, we're starting to really cross from that early adopter section into that early majority. So I think we've already crossed the chasm. We've already gotten to the point where organizations see the value of what this brings. And now we're starting to get more and more of this usage under our belts, well beyond just a small groups, dabbling with the technology, seeing if it's worthwhile or not. So when we talk about agentic AI and generative AI as a whole, there's a lot of applications out there. There's a lot of platforms. Topbots prepared this diagram a few years ago, and it's only grown probably at least 1,000-fold since then. And a lot of the big questions are really which tools do we use? Which tools do we use in what scenarios? How do we vet and verify which tools are actually safe to share our data with? How do we make sure that we're training up and skilling up our employees and making sure that they're not only pushing the buttons, but they're understanding how this works. They're understanding how to use the calculator, so to speak, as opposed to just understanding that if you push buttons, then you'll get a response back. Right? How do we make sure that we're validating that what we're getting is proper and accordingly? How are we taking action when things are not? So when we look at the AI value journey, the base of the pyramid here is really around individual value. And a lot of this is really in terms of, how do we use prompt engineering to really write great prompts to be able to move forward my individual goals for today. So, as a business leader, as an IT leader, my daily goals include attending meetings, responding to emails, making decisions, preparing presentations, preparing budgets, looking at different things that I need to accomplish for the day, and how can I get that done faster. And having that ability and that skill set to write a strong prompt makes the entire difference between having an okay response or a great response come out of the platform. For those that were around when Google was first getting started, if you knew how to use double quotes and a plus minus modifier in Google search, you can pretty much find anything that was indexed on the internet, in the early 90s. With writing good prompts, it's many times more sophisticated. Where if you really put in a weak prompt, you're going to get a very weak response. And if you put in, a 5-page prompt, you're probably going to get a very high quality response. And this is where area things like prompt galleries really come into place, where if you have a repetitive set of questions that you're asking, decisions that you're making, types of data that you're looking to collect, which are organized, having strong prompts in a gallery that could be shared amongst colleagues becomes a very important role. And it also makes it so that you're getting high quality responses back out of the prompts that you're submitting. If we go one level up from individual value of just helping me accomplish what my tasks are and my job role for the day, we're looking at functional value. And these could be now role based agents that have specific functional use cases and have specific objectives. A little bit further on in this presentation, we're going to talk about the 5 most common types of role based agents. And we'll give some examples for how those can come together and actually help solve problems within different departments within organizations. And then the tip of the iceberg is really the org value. And this is where we have autonomous agents that are talking to other agents that are talking to other agents that are now taking the building blocks that you have of the individual value, the functional value, is starting to orchestrate larger scale um, automations, larger scale decision making, data entry, data manipulation, data summarization. There's actually a pretty interesting podcast out there about somebody that is starting a company that is only going to be employed by AI agents and nobody else. Um, the name escapes me at the moment, but for those that are in that space, take a look at it. And this is really a company that's starting fresh, starting to build org value, agentic AIs, and bots across the board from day one. So if we move forward, we do want to talk a little bit about the Microsoft landscape, given that this is a Microsoft Power Platform conference event. So the first is around Microsoft 365 Copilot Chat. This is akin to ChatGPT, where it exists within your browser. If you have any bundle of Microsoft licenses today, whether it's Business Basic, Enterprise E3, E5, or anything in between, you have access to Copilot Chat. The big difference with the free version of Copilot Chat is that you don't have the ability for it to query your corporate data, but you could still upload a document and ask it to summarize, ask it to reason, ask questions where it can help you brainstorm ideas based on content that's available on the public web. And your users are able to start using this today. If you just go to office.com, you'll be redirected into the new Copilot chat interface, and you're ready to go. The next step up from that is the ability to build Copilot agents. So Copilot agents have the ability to be chatbots that can go and respond to specific queries. They can source and ground their data within existing data sources, and meaning SharePoint sites, databases, Azure Function apps, and other data points. And you can also train these bots to have specific purposes to them in terms of how they look at information, how they respond to information, how they ask for follow on questions. And these bots themselves can be licensed on a consumption model, which means that instead of having to buy the M365 Copilot license that we'll talk about in a minute here, you can pay somewhere between 1 and 10 cents per query. The price will vary depending on the complexity of the query. But in doing so, you don't have to commit to something that across the entire organization at $30 per user per month as a way to get started and start using these different agentic bots in ways that make sense for your organization. You also have very granular billing capabilities. So you can specify budgets, you can specify which departments are being charged to which billing code. This is all handled through your Azure consumption billing. So in doing so, Microsoft has really lowered the barrier of entry to be able to get in there, start building agents, start playing with it, find and uncover use cases where this could be beneficial, and really empower your employees to take advantage of this without having to go through a much more expensive license queue to get started. Now, the last one on the slide here is the M365 Copilot, which I believe is worth every penny of the $30 per month that it costs. I personally use this day in and day out, as does a good portion of our workforce. And with this license, you get everything that I just talked about. Those agents, you're no longer paying per query. You're actually getting unlimited queries within that framework. Plus, you also now have Copilot within your Office applications. So if I'm in Outlook and I need to summarize a complicated email thread where there's been, 500 branches of people being added and removed and looped in and looped out, I can now have Copilot in Outlook do that for me right where I'm working. So I'm no longer context switching of taking this Word file that I'm working in, trying to upload it somewhere to ask a question, have it summarize it, have it refine my tone to match the intended audience. Instead of doing all of that, I can do that directly within each of the Office applications. In addition, there's a bunch of other pre-built Microsoft 365 agents that have been rolling out, including the interpreter agent, facilitator agent. The list goes on. So for any of those organizations that are really seeing strong AI usage and consumption, I think the next logical step after you have that consumption building for Copilot Chat is to start expanding into M365 Copilot. All right. So just to touch on this, Copilot for M365 touches pretty much every Office application, from Word to PowerPoint to Excel, Outlook, Teams, Forms, the list goes on. And every application has a different use case for how Copilot is being leveraged. So it's not just the same Copilot functionality put on top of every application. It's really into the context of how those applications are meant to be used and the different types of Copilot prompts you can give it to help you be more effective in there. So the next thing we want to talk about is Azure AI Foundry. Um, Copilot Studio is great for building your initial set of bots. I think it's a very powerful platform. It lets you do a lot of things, especially with a low code, no code type of approach, where you don't need to write a single line of code in order to leverage Copilot Studio. That being said, we might get to the point where we're starting to push the edge of what Copilot Studio bots can do for us without some additional help. And that additional help comes in the flavor of the Azure AI Foundry ecosystem. So Microsoft has a very robust set of AI offerings within Azure. In full transparency, most of these will require some level of code to be written, and there's a variety of both first-party offerings as well as third-party offerings that really give us the ability to take any type of AI problem that we're looking to solve and being able to solve that within this framework. And furthermore, all of these APIs and all of these custom developments that you might be putting into place here can be exposed and leveraged through Copilot Studio. So it's not that once you switch into here, you're in full dev mode for everyone and for everything. But if you structure this properly, this could be a framework where you're starting to expose additional functionality that could be available to your Copilot Studio agents so that your employees that are ready to build those agents and ready to embrace them now have a much bigger set of tools that they could use to meet their objectives. So I want to give some quick walkthroughs for that individual productivity based on job role, and we'll walk through a few steps of how the different copilots can assist a typical day in the life. So the first one we'll show is from an executive's perspective, and this is an executive preparing for an all hands meeting. And the whole intent here is that AI is not a platform that you have to context switch to go and switch into to go be productive, like we're using a new Slack or Teams or Yammer or Viva Engage or any of these other platforms that you're really going somewhere else to do something. The value of AI really comes that this is in the flow of work, that we're not context switching just to be able to go and use AI, quote unquote. It's really integrated in terms of how we work, in terms of the existing applications that we're involved in. And in doing so, it makes it very easy for us to get the true value out of the different tools and functions that we get here. So just as a very brief walkthrough, say we're an executive preparing for an all hands meeting. First thing we might do is to go into Copilot chat and figure out what are the latest things that my team's been talking about, both in email threads and chat conversations for what are the key things we want to highlight as a briefing to the organization. The next, I can schedule a meeting with my executive team to go through what we've talked about, figure out what are the different updates for each of the business units. And then when we get to the end of the meeting, I can ask Copilot to create the action items from those meetings, assign them to the owners and planner, and then also help drive that in terms of the key updates that we want to share with the rest of the organization. From there, we can go into Word and using a reference point from the Teams meeting that we had, we can have Word draft a speech based on the audience for what we're presenting it to, which could set the tone, could set the vocabulary used, it can determine how technical or non-technical we want the actual presentation to be. And then once we have that speech drafted, we can ask PowerPoint to go ahead and create this, including using visuals that could be generated through AI or pulled from the web or from our existing approved library of stock photos, with the intention to go and take that speech and break it down into more formalized sections and categories, things that could have a visual representation to it. Now, leading up to the meeting, I may want to go back, review last quarter's town hall that we had, all hands rather, and identify what we talked about, what we presented, and make sure there's continuity to the storyline. So that if there were specific aspects that were mentioned, we want to make sure that we're not forgetting to provide an update on them. On the same token, we want to make sure that if we're presenting information, we're putting it in context of where we were before, ideally to show progress that's been made since the last all hands. Now, last but not least, we want to draft a thank you message. We might want to incorporate some of the Q&A that took place within that team's town hall, and be able to draft that in Outlook and be able to send that out with the ability to be very personalized based on the conversations that were just had. Give a couple more examples. One example would be, let's say that you're the CIO for your organization. I personally do this almost every morning where I wake up and I need to prepare for my daily meetings. If you're like many people, you might be booked or double booked for most time slots throughout the day. So Copilot Chat gives me the ability to summarize what we're meeting about at each of the time slots, who's part of it, what are the relevant meetings or documents related to that meeting. And this helps me pick and choose if I'm double booked, where I'm going to spend most of my efforts on that time. Because of this, I'm often not able to attend every meeting. So I'm able to use Copilot Summary to be able to summarize what was said in meetings that I was not able to attend. And in addition, if my name was mentioned, they'll also be able to show me that areas where I'm specifically brought up in case I need to follow up with somebody, address something, or pay a little bit closer attention to that part of the recording just to make sure that whatever was being said about me, being questioned of me, being requested of me, is not something that I'm missing. The next is around Copilot Chat. So now that we're having these meetings and we're talking about strategies, I might want to use this to take a look at what was discussed last meeting, figure out what were some of the budgetary constraints that were discussed. Really helps me on the fly being able to understand what's relevant to the context of a conversation by being able to refer to previous conversations that were had. And previously it would take me an hour of preparation every morning to sit down and really go through all of my meetings, all of the recaps, understand where my notes are for each of the upcoming calls. Now I could do this a lot faster and a lot more in real time. We touched a bit on the creating of a PowerPoint based on the outcomes. And then lastly here is with an Excel, we're also able to pull up the current quarterly budget in the context of the conversations that we've had, in context of the transcripts, come up with areas where there might be the ability to cut costs or take a look at what the next quarter's budget could look like. All right, one more example is around legal. And the intent here is quicker contract review. So one, you know, there could be a very large email thread about negotiating finer points of a contract. That could be red lines that come up in Word documents. There might be some discussions around what are acceptable terms. And the intent is that instead of going through every email one by one, we can have Copilot Chat summarize what's happening in that email and just pull out the essential information, and bring it into the final round of negotiations so that we can summarize what we're agreeing to, what we're not agreeing to, and really focus those areas on where it needs to go. I could then use Copilot Chat to take the latest version of the red lines, have it summarize it for me to understand what are some of the key asks of the contract, what are the standard ways that we're deviating from our standard terms and conditions. And I can have Copilot in Word compare the two documents and prepare a legal summary of the differences of what has changed from one version of the document onto the next. Then we can use Copilot in Teams to have a meeting with the client to go through and go through each of the points one by one, create a formal set of meeting minutes based on what was discussed. And then from there, we can create briefing notes to be able to go through and take this for final approval. So as those examples show, there's a lot of ways in the flow of things where if you really challenge yourself to use AI first when it comes to solving your day-to-day tasks, you're going to start to uncover a lot of ways that AI could be used to lift a little bit of the burden on what you would manually be doing. And the more that you use it, the more you get better at using it, the more you unlock other opportunities within your typical daily workflow. And then in doing so, you become a lot more efficient over a period of time as you get more comfortable and more familiar with how this all behaves. So now let's talk about the AI agent model. So think of a world where there's agents that are talking to agents that are talking to agents without human interaction being required for a lot of these types of discussions, decisions, and workflow events that take place. So, on a very high level, on the left side of this model, we have inputs. Inputs could be user messages, right? Maybe I'm asking the agent a question for, who's working this shift with me on Thursday. System events. This could be alerts that are triggered from all sorts of different systems. If you're using a scene like Microsoft Syntax, that could be the trigger depending on a specific alert that comes in. Or these could also be messages that are coming in from other agents, whether they're structured or unstructured messages. But the intent is that these are all different ways that an agent could be triggered to begin. Now that we have this information coming into the agents, we have the large language models within the agents where maybe I'm being asked a task to summarize, maybe to make context of some new information, to make a decision. I can have instructions on the agent for based on the different types of inputs, different types of scenarios that are coming to it, how we want it to behave. The agent can also have all sorts of additional tools to their disposal, which might be to go and retrieve additional information from third-party systems. It might be to go and take an action in a third party. It might be to go back into the memory if we're doing, state or stateless based agents and be able to recall what happened previously, how the outcome came, and what the better decision might have been. And then we have an output, and the output could either be a message to another agent or it could be a structured output, something that might be either returned back to the user, returned back into a system, or into another tool. So we'll go into a little bit more detail of the different types of agents, but on a very high level, this is the overall AI agent model that we're seeing work well within the industry. So that being said, let's talk about the different types of common types of agents. Now, there's a lot of agents, and when you go to create an agent, you're not necessarily being asked which one of these you'd like to create, but these are the different design patterns that we're seeing emerge based on the specific use cases of the agents. And for each of these, we're going to dive into some more detail in the coming slides. But just to start at the high level, we have reactive agents. So this is something where there's a trigger, there's an event, it's a stateless agent, something happens, and we need to go and take an action, whether it's to respond to a question, whether it's to go and make a change in a system, whether it's to go send an email. But the intent is that it's very reactive. Then we have model-based agents. So model-based agents are trained on the model of what the environment looks like. So here are the different aspects and triggers and levers within a given environment. And then given this input, what is the best way to make an informed decision to have the best type of outcome? And this could rely on memory, meaning you can understand what was previously inputted and outputted, whether that made sense. We can take a look at previous patterns of what was working well. And the intent here is that we're explaining the model of the responsibility, and then we're having it navigate the decisions within the context of that model. We'll have some more examples coming up shortly. Then we have goal-based model agents. So here we have specific objectives that we want to push. We want to minimize downtime. We want to minimize routing. We want to save time. Then based on the inputs that comes in, the agent has a different variety of paths that they could evaluate what needs to take place in order for that goal to be achieved. And, and with that, this could be calling other agents, it could be calling other systems, it could be providing information back. But this has a very binary based, did we meet the goal or not type of output. Then we have utility-based agents. So utility-based agents are the next evolution of goal-based agents, and now they're able to weigh multiple different factors. And their outcome is not on a blanket yes or no, did we meet the goal, but it's really on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10, how well did we achieve the goal? And this is where there might be scenarios where there's not a single good answer. Maybe there's different trade-offs that need to take place in order for a specific outcome to be reached. And in doing so, these utility-based agents are trained with the different factors, the different levers, the different weightages about what's important, what should be done, what should never be done, in order to make a decision based on a complicated input. And then last but not least are the learning agents. These are the agents that are continuously improving themselves by learning from past experiences, learning what the previous inputs were, what the outcomes were, whether that was a good decision, whether there's a better way to do things. So that over a period of time, the learning agents become smarter and smarter at making decisions that drive the outcomes that are desired. Let's move forward. So let's talk about some examples for these reactive agents. So customer support agent is a very common one. A ticket is received. They can draft a response based on a knowledge base and formal responses and provide that information to your customer service agent to either go and tell it to the user directly, or if you're enabling end users to interact with these agents, they can do that as well. Brand compliance agents, right? We've seen this all the time where we want to publish something publicly, whether it's a white paper, it's a presentation, it's a new logo alteration for a given event, and we want to make sure that we're not breaking the corporate branding guidelines. And we know the corporate branding team is very busy, so we don't want to bug them for every little thing. So in this scenario, we can have an agent where you can submit a piece of collateral, and they could review the branding usage, tone of the language used, and really provide feedback on whether or not this is a compliant use, or if any modifications should be required to make it more compliant. Expense report agent. Submit an expense report. It can go through, identify missing receipts or limit items, and just in a very reactive sense, give you a sense of, is your expense report approved or are there items that need to be corrected or justified? Calendar conflict agent, if there's a double book meeting, it can help propose alternative times to the organizer so that we're not having people double and triple booked day in, day out. And then a task reminder agent. Scanning all of the user tasks apps and sending reminders. So these are all very reactive, whether it's being triggered by a user message, whether it's by another agent, whether it's by an alert, whether it's a scheduled prompt. But the intent is that something comes in and they give a response back. The next are a few examples of model-based agents. So in this scenario, let's talk about a customer journey optimization agent. So this would be within that marketing field. And the first thing that would really take place is that we have a whole bunch of data sources, whether they're coming out of our CRMs, out of our web analytics, whether our customer support platforms, other product telemetry that we might have, social media sentiment and analysis. And based on all of these different inputs, we can start preparing a journey mapping. And in this case, we can have a real-time model of each customer's journey in terms of how they interact with us over the course of the different applications that they interact with. And within here, there might be very different stages that are mapped back to the user, right? Whether they're exploring a new brand just for awareness, whether they're starting to get ready to make a decision and make a consideration, all the way through to purchasing, onboarding, engagement, and then ultimately renewal. And within here, we want to start doing some behavior predictions. So based on historical data across all of our customers, we want to understand, what are the next best actions that we could be taking, right? What are the likelihood that they're not going to renew? Are there additional services that they might be interested in based on product pages that they're exploring on our website, based on support questions that they're asking, where there might be an upsell opportunity to be able to go and offer an additional package that they might not have already. Then understanding the whole context of exactly who they are, where they're spending their time, what kind of questions they were asking, there could be very personalized recommendations that could be drafted, and specifically recommending at what stage how that could be communicated out to the users, whether it's during a period of high infrequent usage that's abnormal, or whether it's closer to a renewal cycle, or through other parts of the journey, and really understand what can we do to retain this customer and potentially offer more value to them through additional services. And with all of this, we can start to assign scoring to the clients, push this back into the CRM, identify when is a good time for your salesperson to reach out to them, whether to prevent a churn or to increase the overall lifetime value of the customer. And these types of bottom-based agents could be really trained on what this model looks like, what good looks like, what bad looks like, and really start to take these inputs coming from the different states and start to really craft how this may impact a given customer and what those actions should be to keep them engaged and retained. The next model is about a goal-based agent. So in this scenario, let's talk about a warehousing example where we want to make sure that we're maintaining optimal inventory, right? So we don't want to be in a scenario where we have products that are being demanded that we don't have in stock. We also don't want to overstock items. And if we're dealing with multiple suppliers, we also want to identify what we can do to make sure we're getting the best pricing at the best balance between managing risk. So with a typical system like this, you probably have a few different data sources. You have your ERP, which is your golden source of truth for a lot of the transactions that take place. You have your sales and order history that might be tracked in a different system where we understand when there's peaks and valleys and what types of the customer buying patterns exist. We might have supplier lead time data to understand which suppliers have a specific lead time before they can stock it. If I order today, am I going to get this tomorrow or is it going to be a month from now? And maybe additional external signals for how the broader macro market is doing within our given product line. So as part of this, we can do some demand forecasting. We can figure out what are those reorder points and how do we suggest to the inventory manager when it makes sense to go and place orders and with which suppliers. There could also be a number of scenario planning, like what happens if tomorrow we do get an unexpected spike? What does that look like? What does that shake out? What is the potential revenue lost if we don't, overstock on a smaller amount? And really start to plan out what are those different scenarios to give our inventory manager all of everything that they would need to make effective decisions as it comes to ordering and restocking the information. And then, of course, you have your alerting where there's all sorts of anomalies that could be detected, anything from low stock to other abnormalities within that supply chain process to make sure that we're making the right best decisions that we possibly can. And next are utility-based agents. So in this scenario, we can talk about something like marketing compliance. In this example, we're using a regulated industry, such as a company that makes supplements. Now, there's going to be a lot of regulations that they're beholden to, including FDA, USDA, the list goes on. But furthermore, there's specific aspects of what could be said on a label, right? Like you can't say that your vitamin cures cancer, for example. There's specific language that can and cannot be used, and this includes the product labels, the websites, the ads, social media, the list goes on. So one aspect that this compliance agent can do is that for any piece of collateral, go through and identify what are the different types of claims that we're making within this piece of collateral, right? Whether it's the nutrition label that says what vitamins and compounds are in there, whether we're making assertions, whether we're making disease claims, and tie that back into the context of what the different rules are with the FDA, the FTC, and identify, what level of compliance will be affected based on the nature of what's being inputted. Then we want to go through and make sure that all of the right disclaimers are in place that are required. We need to make sure that if there's some big assertions that are being made, that we have the evidence to back it up and that there's proper citations included, or if it has to be kicked back saying that this sounds incorrect, give the ability for the person submitting it to provide supplemental information to help evaluate that piece of collateral in the context of that additional information, in the context of all of the compliance rules that need to be followed. And then after things get published, we can go through and do post-launch monitoring. So make sure that we're continuing to look at channels so that everything that should be published is actually being published. And if there's any kind of missing disclosures or something that doesn't make the copy and paste between social media platforms, that there could be triggers and alerts to be able to go ahead and make those corrections. And then last but not least, support to generate compliance dashboards to identify, how compliant are we being? How many things are we rejecting? How well is our content creation team following the rules that they should be upfront, and really ensuring that we're reducing a lot of the risk that takes place with marketing compliance. Moving forward, so the last type of agent that we spoke about earlier, which is the learning agent. So in this scenario, we're essentially think of a delivery driver where we're scheduling our delivery trucks to be able to go through to the customer locations and do things in a smart way. So The purpose, we're going to go through and we're going to schedule which routes each of the different delivery trucks are going to take, and assign who's going to be assigned to which route on which day. And part of this could be to take a look at what are the different volumes of shipments for a given day to identify what are the types of trucks that need to be used on a given route, which then can map it back to what type of drivers are qualified for the different sizes of trucks, identify if there's urgent orders that are involved, and figure out how we best prioritize those so that they are delivered first, or so that they are absolutely at least delivered within the given SLA. If there's active traffic changes that are coming into place, if there's past delays due to specific route issues, figure out how we can go ahead and optimize that, especially for the different parameters that are in play. And this is a bit where that learning comes into place, where we know that even if Google Maps doesn't tell us that there's traffic in a given area, but we know that there's always holdups, maybe there's railroad crossings, maybe there's other aspects that are causing this. The learning agent can learn from this and take that into consideration for the next planning cycle. The next is around dynamic rescheduling. So if a driver has to call out sick in the middle of their shift, how do we restructure and rearrange all of the existing delivery trucks to meet those overall objectives, which might include bringing trucks back and reloading them. Maybe this requires changing some routes and maybe deciding to hold off on some deliveries until the following day to make sure there's enough time to get the critical ones out the door. And then last but not least is the ongoing performance and learning. So really going through those key metrics of how we're assigning the roles, and making sure that we're continuing to do a good job and learning from challenges that we face as we progress forward. So we talked about a bit of the rapidly evolving world of AI across the board with different applications, different tools, different abilities to build your own agents, different abilities to use third-party models with Azure AI Foundry. We talked about different needs of different types of agents that are coming around to start really delivering that functional value as well as that organizational value. So we've taken all of these different considerations and we've put together a reference model for what a proper AI center of excellence will look like to help you organize all of the different aspects of everything that we've talked about. And this is a model that we're sharing here for you to be able to take, and you can feel free to take screenshots. Feel free to email me with a QR code at the end of this presentation. I'm happy to share these slides with you as well. But I do want to walk through some of the key foundational elements that you should be thinking about as you're starting to craft what that internal center of excellence will look like for AI within your organization. We're going to start this on the far left side, and this is where you have your business or IT customer. So this is where you're uncovering scenarios where either somebody's coming to you and saying, I need this tool to go and help me do X, or I have this business problem. I think AI might be a solution to help me resolve it. Can you help us out? Or you might have somebody coming in and saying, look, we have this AI problem. We have this vendor that we already want to use. We have a good relationship with, but we want to make sure that they're doing things in a way that's compliant with our overall governance. And when they finish the project, we need somebody to still own the actual maintenance of the software or the solution long after that consulting partner is done with their work. So we have this intake process, and moving from the far left over into this next section where we have the AI application portal. So we'd recommend putting up a portal where people can submit forms in terms of requests. People can gain access to resources that you have in terms of what AI is, what it isn't, what are the different trainings that are available to your end users, and really be able to showcase examples of how AI has been used effectively within the organization. So these customers will come into your portal, and within here, there's going to be a flavor of relationship management, where if you have five competing requests for the similar type of urgency, ultimately someone needs to decide on where our AI resources are going to be allocated, and that relationship management becomes a very critical role to ensure that you're meeting your overall business objectives while at the same time making sure that business owners are not just turning away and swiping their corporate credit card and buying the next AI platform that's out there. You really want to make sure that things are done in a way that's very well controlled, in a way that empowers your broader vision and strategy, and not just having a ton of tactical solutions in place that might be throwaway once the broader vision comes to life. Across the top here, we have engagement governance. Now, with any kind of larger organization, you're going to be most likely in a multi-vendor model where you're going to have a number of different consulting partners that can deliver different values of AI across different parts of your organization. And what becomes most important as you're doing this is that it's being done in a very safe way. This is where your overall AI policies come into place, your KPIs for AI usage within the organization, your risks and controls, especially ensuring that you're not leaking data to third party services, that things are being done in a very controlled and secure way. Responsible and ethical AI, making sure that we're not using AI for evil, and also keeping an eye on the overall vision and strategy. Right? We've seen many scenarios where 10 tactical solutions could be replaced with one strategic solution. But because these were all done in isolation, there was no visibility, there was no clear roadmap for what the strategy was to be. And in doing so, we had a bunch of silos of data and AI processing instead of one cohesive way in a way that talks to each other. Next box here is around AI enablement. So this is really where we want to establish proper criteria for how do we um, evaluate the AI tools that are going to be brought into the market or into our organization. How do we take a look to make sure that we have proper data residency, that our data will not be used to train models, that the vendors have their proper audits and certifications, that we trust that if we were to have our data living and being processed by their platforms, that it wasn't going to be shared accidentally across other customers, and that they have the right security in place to protect our data the same way that we would. There's a variety of other aspects in here of doing pilots, having tools and standardizations, building out roadmaps. The AI landscape is changing on a very rapid basis. So it's not practical to have one set of standards that are going to be the iron fist for everything going forward. But there's a lot of opportunity to go and be able to embrace the changes as they're happening and really having a lot of mini projects in place to go and evaluate that newest model that comes out, to go and evaluate this new tool and see if this does performs better than the previous versions. Then there's a whole slew of user enablement. And a lot of this is really empowering users to use these technologies. Now, with Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot chats, there's a lot of great training materials out there. But as you're onboarding and building additional AI solutions, it also becomes important that every solution has a training component tied to it. Because unlike web browser search, we can't assume that our users are just going to pick it up, type in a few things in a query box, and have great results. We really need to make sure that employees are educated that as we're building custom agents, as we're building new ways to interact with AI reasoning and processing, that there's specific trainings available, whether it's blog posts, short form videos, long form videos, formal classroom trainings, or what have you. But we can't just give it to users and go. Across the bottom, we have our security enablement. So it's very important that we're having tight control of what's happening to our data. And with tools like DPSM and others with Microsoft Purview, we now have the ability to understand and uncover when unsanctioned AI tools are being used within the organization and even block their usage or at least block the usage of sensitive data within those applications. But this all comes together to making sure that we're having proper security risk assessments performed and that we're following the security policies that are in place. Across the right, we have some additional reporting and dashboards that we want to make sure that we're seeing what tools are being used, if we're seeing drop-offs of usage, identify what could be causing those, have proactive outreach, have additional trainings available, and ultimately make sure that we're getting our ROI on our investments within these AI solutions. And then, of course, across the bottom, some fundamental pillars, including executive sponsorship and strategic alignment, become crucial to making sure that this all comes together and that we have the right controls in place and the right authority to go and block unauthorized use, as well as making sure that things that are being used are being done so in a way that makes sense strategically. So, with that being said, I want to thank you for joining today's webinar. Please feel free to reach out to me by email, LinkedIn, um, or our website. This QR code on the right here will also take you to my LinkedIn. Would love to connect and stay in touch. And that being said, I'm going to pass it back to Ella for the remaining 10 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dimitri, for that. Well, to everyone watching on the live stream, thank you so much for joining us. We're about to wrap up the stream shortly. Make sure to secure your spot at the Power Platform Community Conference taking place on October 27th to 29th in Las Vegas. Please register now by scanning the QR code on your screen or head over to powerplatformconf.com. Use the discount code BOGO, BOGO, to get a buy one, get one free when you register for the conference. If you'd like to participate in the Q&A live with Dimitri, please be sure that you join us using the link provided in your calendar invite. We're ending the live stream now. Bye. All right. And with that, we're let's open the floor for the Q&A, and let's look at uh,